All right, should we play the Orlovsky?
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense for me. If I had to use a phrase to describe Washington's offense, it's pace and space. That's kind of their bread and butter and who they want to be. Mina talked about it, and we've talked about it for a year now. The pace on offense, that no huddle, and then the space that creates, sometimes because of the tempo, sometimes because of how wide their formations are. And when you combine them together, that's why you get so many of those perimeter screens. No quarterback in the NFL threw more perimeter screens last year than Jaden Daniels. So you're talking about potentially lining them up in the backfield and giving them the ball, absolutely. But then you're also talking about being in this no-huddle offense and giving a guy the ball on the perimeter right now that is as good with the ball in his hands out in space as anybody in the NFL. And there's a simplicity to that is so simple for an offense and a quarterback. I do think that Washington is fascinating, though, MK, because of this. And I loved Washington last year. I want to give them their flowers and credit them. I also don't think that they can fall into the trap thinking they're that close. 5 wins on the last play of the game, essentially, that's not likely in the NFL. And so while they're encouraged and intriguing, they're not one Deebo Samuel away from chasing down Philadelphia. There are still flaws in this roster that they got to have a very much so attack mindset and not resting on the success of last year mindset.
The perimeter thing,
I agree with
this is the way I look at it.
I think all of that.
Chris Russell had me on his show yesterday when I was hanging around and we were talking about the Deebo deal. I just figure all those screens, if he was number 1 in screens to the perimeter, and I don't think Orlovsky's making that up. Mm-hmm. Well, now, instead of throwing that perimeter screen to OZ or to De'Ami Brown, you're going to one of the best guys, in terms of yards after the catch and contact, this bruising type player. It's going to be even more successful is the way that I look at it, those perimeter screens.
Yeah, especially if most of those guys don't come back. Think of how many targets Deebo Samuel is going to get 5 or 6 yards from the line of scrimmage if there's no Oz, if there's no De'Ami Brown. Mm-hmm. Now, you still need some other pieces on your offense aside from Deebo Samuel. So maybe they re-sign De'Ami, but I don't see a scenario where they bring back De'Ami, Oz, and Noah Brown. Somebody's got to go.
Right.
Yep. Maybe 2 of those guys have to go.
The guys that we were talking to yesterday, some of the guys that cover the team, they think the market for De'Ami is going to be just big, so it won't be back.
Right,
Oz is the guy.
If De'Ami Brown gets a 3-year, $28 million offer from another team, I think it's going to be bye-bye De'Ami.
I'd be surprised if he got that much.
Business.
Real quick, let me give you.
You might be right.
I would too.
I would be surprised.
Real quick, let me give you the key word for our Buckets and Bets promo. The key word is block. Block. So you enter now with the keyword block at thefandc.com, theteam980.com, or thefanrichmond.com for your chance to win in our Buckets and Bets promo. We're going to send you to Seminole Hard Rock Hotel and Casino Hollywood. You get to watch all the games on the big screens and have a great time placing bets.
2 blocks today.
There you have it. There's your keyword.
But I will say that just going back to sort of Orlovsky's greater point, does anybody think they're a player away from chasing down Philly?
I think there's a lot of people out there that think they're neck and neck for the division.
I don't think that at all. I think we need help at every level.
Sure, but the way I look at it is you were in the NFC Championship game. You had a bunch of turnovers in that game. You're not that far off. The one thing about these conversations
now... Yeah, but how'd you get there is his point.
The one thing about these conversations now is people are forgetting about the other teams. Now, they beat Detroit and beat them handily, but Detroit was the 1 seed.
Right.
Mm-hmm. They're not going anywhere. I know they lost a bunch of coaches, but their key players are all back.
They're still going to be a tough out.
Detroit's going to be a force, and they get Hutchinson back on defense. We'll see what happens in the offseason. You mentioned San Francisco before. It's a team that didn't make the playoffs, but maybe they get healthy and they come back. There's going to be other teams besides Philadelphia in the NFC picture that they're going to have to tangle with.
Also, you're ignoring the point that he made, which, of course, I made months ago, and I got ridiculed, that you're not going to win 5 games on the last play of the... that's just a fluke. And everyone got upset.
Some breaks.
Oh, EB said fluke.
But here's the other thing.
But that kind of was a fluke.
But what Orlovsky says is they're not 1 player away. I think that's stupid. Free agency hasn't even started yet. The draft hasn't occurred.
Yeah. Right.
They're
but
going to
nobody-
add players.
Of course. But nobody
Yeah,
thinks
but
they're
so
one
are the
player
Eagles.
away.
So are the other teams that they're buying.
But
with.
all of these teams are going to change. This
Right.
roster that you're seeing right now is not going to be the roster in week one.
They can't even field a roster.
I think his point, though, is that there's a gap, in his opinion, between the Eagles and Washington.
I think everyone agrees.
And
with
there
that.
is.
I agree.
No one
Personnel-wise.
disagrees with that.
I've said every layer of this team, other than
They've got-
quarterback,
They've got Saquon Barkley.
every layer, we have needs. You don't say that same thing about the Eagles.
The fact that the Eagles hung a 55 spot on them in the NFC title game, it tells you they're not one player away. Like they need to keep layering talent through the draft.
And they will.
Through signings. Yeah.
I mean, there's going to be 20 new guys on this roster.
Right.
Maybe
Pace
more.
and space. I thought that was an NBA term, but Orlovsky using it describing Cliff Kingsbury's offense.
But Deebo helps. He helps.
Oh, he's a nice piece to add.
And, let's see what happens next week when they start talking to the free agents, the draft. If you need a receiver or corner or an edge rusher, they're going to get guys. Their top 3 picks, 1, 2, and 3, because they don't have a 4th and a 5th round.
Right now, they don't.
Now maybe they trade a second and acquire a couple more picks. But if they stay at 1, 2, 3, they're going to get 3 good players.
800-636-1067. You heard what Dan Orlovsky had to say. He likes the Deebo deal, but he doesn't think it closes the gap on the Eagles. Do you still think there's this big gap between the Eagles and the Washington Commanders? 800-636-1067. We'll take your calls next here on the Junkies.